Hello everyone and welcome to an opening guide on the Traxler Counterattack. Two things before we get started. First off, this is a gambit and a very dubious one at that. The engine over here will absolutely hate you for playing this opening. However, something about this is that this Traxler counterattack will give you some of the most hyper-aggressive and craziest positions in all chess, and they're so crazy that the engine, the Master Levels players, and even me myself showing you this video right now cannot fully understand this opening. So always take this engine eval with a little bit of salt as well. And secondly, because I've seen nobody on YouTube actually do it yet, in this video I'm going to cover all of the theory. I'm going to give you every single line, tell you exactly what to do in all of them. And if anything, you could call this a little bit overboard, so keep in mind, I will be giving you everything. It is definitely not necessary to know everything in this video to play the Traxler. And for your sake, I will be adding chapters onto this video, as well as adding a link to the current chess.com analysis that I have all the moves on just right to the side. So let's get started. So first off, how do we actually get to the Traxler in the first place? It comes after pawn to e4 by white, and we play pawn up to e5, white goes knight to f3 attacking, knight to c6 defending, and bishop to c4, the Italian game. This is extremely standard and extremely common. I think this might actually be the most common opening in chess by now. And here we play knight to f6, the two knights defense, and white has a few good moves here. However, the most common one by far is knight to g5. And this is the so-called fried liver attack, attacking f7 with the knight and the bishop. I actually have an opening video on this opening, the fried liver, because I think it is also very powerful. However, here, instead of going into the pawn to d5, and then knight to a5, and all the main lines and stuff, we will be playing bishop to c5. The Traxler counterattack. Now, with this move, we are developing the bishop right away, and we're preparing to actually sacrifice it on f2 in the case that white takes on f7 with the knight. And yes, we are completely sacrificing this pawn with the corresponding fork of our rook and queen, but it just does not matter at all. So I'll be looking at knight takes on f7 first, but real quick, there's one quick line I want to show you. If white just simply castles here, for example, you simply want to castle as well, and white is just not in a good position. There are around 80,000 games where white just castles, and it's just not a good move because now knight to g5 is just kind of a waste. This pawn is defended, and sacrificing an f7 like this is never scary. This is just good for us because a bishop and a knight for a rook and a pawn is actually just much better. And because of that, you would already have an advantage in this position, and this is not a challenging try for white in the slightest. So now let's get into knight takes on f7. So with this move, they're forking our rook and our queen, but first off, we actually do not have to move it. Instead, we play the ridiculous bishop takes on f2, sacrificing the bishop, and they will capture it. I'll also get into the king to f1 line afterwards. That is also very important and something you should definitely learn. So they capture our bishop here, and keep in mind we are still forked, and we take another pawn with check. We play knight takes on e4 here, taking the pawn as well as checking their king. And let's just take a step back for a second. We are down an entire piece for one pawn, and despite being down material and still being forked here, we actually have a massive attack going against white. We are going to get both of our knights in, probably our bishop and our rook as well, and especially our queen. Our queen comes out in every single variation. And you'll quickly see that even though white is going to be up a lot of material, they're simply going to have no pieces actually defending their king. So after we capture on e4 with this check, white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 moves that they can make with their king. Now, this one and this one are the only good ones. Those both actually try and usually will go into either a slightly better position for white or a full out draw. However, all 4 of these other ones lose on the spot. So first, I'm going to show you king back to g1. This is one of the good lines and the more popular one at that. And if they play this, then now we move our queen in. We play queen to h4. This queen will pretty much always come out on the next move. And we are immediately threatening a checkmate on f2 here with our queen and our knight, so white has to defend it. And they have two moves here that are very common, those being pawn up to g3 and queen to f3 here, and g3 is the slightly better move. If they play this, then you actually want to sacrifice your knight on g3. You simply want to capture it. The idea being is that we first off open up our queen to see the bishop, which is a very important detail in a lot of variations, not just this one. And the rook is also stuck in the corner right here. So what should white do here? White's best move here is to capture our rook in the corner. If they do this, then now what you want to do is play knight to d4. Get your other knight in the game, and this knight to d4 move is also an extremely common move that will happen in basically every single variation, either sooner or later. And now the best line here is for them to capture. You're going to capture back. And after king to f1 here, I'm going to wholeheartedly suggest that you just go for a perpetual check here. Queen to f4, king to g2, queen to g5 check. White cannot escape the checks. If queen blocks, you would simply capture it because of that nice knight to d4 move. And I would simply recommend to go for a draw here. White is up 8 points of material, yet they cannot do anything with it. And the other thing they can try here is back here, after they do not capture our rook, this line comes out of them not capturing our rook, instead capturing our knight here in g3, I would once again recommend you go into a position where you either get a perpetual check or have a decent amount of compensation. You will capture on g3 of check, king moves over, and now you want to get your rook out of being attacked, so you play rook over to f8. This is once again an extremely common idea that will happen sooner or later in pretty much every variation unless the rook is captured, to move it to f8 to get this pin here and taking control of the open file. And it will also happen in a lot of positions, not particularly in this one, where we can actually castle here to get our rook on this square and get our king safe at the same time. So rook over to f8, and the engine's best line here is knight to c3. Now you want to play pawn up to d5, get your bishop into the game, and because white needs to keep this bishop defending this, they capture with their bishop. Now bishop to h3 check. They're forced to sacrifice a rook, otherwise they would just lose promptly. We capture back, and after king to g1, you have two options here. You can either play king to g3, king to h1, and then just shuffle your king between these two squares and go for a perpetual check. However, if you want to play on, you can also capture on f7 for rook, like here, for example, after this, check. You can capture an f7 for rook here. It is not the engine's favorite choice, but if you want to play on, that is definitely not a bad option. So that was their best defense. However, now let's go into their slightly worse defense. They're going to lose a lot more often, that being queen to f3 here. Now, this is not a great move because now we play rook over to f8, and their queen is just right there, and they've pinned themselves when they really just do not need to. And white's best move here is queen to e3, which I must say is actually very, very rare, just moving their queen out of the way. If they do this, then they have a very nice knight to f2 here. With this move, you are attacking the rook in the corner, as well as once again opening up your queen to see this bishop. As I said, this is a very common idea. Actually capturing our knight is not good, because then after captures, they're actually also going to lose the knight because of this pin here is just simply too strong, and our queen also attacks it, so they're going to lose that. That's not very good. Instead, the engine's best line here, which I must say you're probably never going to place. I think I said place instead of face. Anyways, pawn to d4 here is that move. If you do end up getting this, then you want to reroute your knight back to g4. Attack the queen. It will move likely over to g3 here. You're going to want to trade queens and then capture on d4 with your knight. Now white is still up a pawn here, but these two pawns are doubled, their king is very weak, and you are immediately threatening c2 with a fork, and this bishop here has to keep controlling this very weak knight. And for example, this is a very common blunder here. If knight to a3, defending the pawn like this, then now pawn d5 actually just wins. You attack the bishop, you sever the connection to the knight, so you're going to end up winning it, and if they capture, then now knight to, what's a square, e2, is actually just going to get them into a fork. King to f1 here, knight takes on g3, they're simply getting forked, they're going to lose a lot of material with a very bad position, so that's a nice little trap to keep in mind. And that queen to e3 move is the best, however it is not very common. Instead, pawn to g3 is a bit more common here. However, this is not good because of, once again, knight takes on g3. Keep this idea glued in your head. You'll see it in a lot of variations of the Traxler whenever pawn to g3 comes up. The idea is that if they capture back, then they capture the bishop. We once again have this position where the rook is pinning the knight to the queen attacks the knight, and they simply cannot defend it, and because of that, you're going to get a very good position. So g3 does not work very well. They also have one other move here, which is pawn to d3, and this also does not work because of a nice queen to e1 check. Queen has to block. You actually trade queens here, which is very, very atypical for the Traxler. Don't know what that was. And now a simple knight back to d6. Attacking the bishop, attacking the knight. It cannot capture because you've attracted the king onto the square. And after something like bishop to d5, you capture on f7. And this trade here, you are slightly better here. You're up 1 point of material. This king is very weak, and you have a preferable endgame. So that is the absolute best line for them with king to g1. I know that was very, very far in depth, but like I said, you don't have to memorize all these moves, and I want to go very far in depth, and I have not actually seen anyone else on YouTube actually go that far. Also, I just realized it's kind of hard for me to say in depth. Anyways, so king to g1 here was the main line, but the other move that is also good is king up to e3. And this move is a lot more dangerous looking. However, if white does know what they are doing, they will end up with a pretty much even position. Once again here, you want to go queen to h4. Defend the knight in the center, and what white should do here is play pawn up to g3. However, two of other moves, which are the most common and the third most common move, actually lose on the spot. Queen to f3 here is the most common move, but it loses to a very nice knight back to f6. The knight was being attacked in center, so you move it out of the way, and after they capture the rook, you play knight to d4. You attack their queen, and they're actually just all out of luck and just completely losing here. If they play queen to g3, which is very common, then now knight back to f5 here. They get forked, you're simply winning. And if instead they try pawn up to g3 here to try and counterattack your queen, then simply queen g5 check the king, then you'll take the queen on the next move. You are simply winning here, because even though you're actually still going to be, I believe, down material after this trade happens, white's king is so weak, and this knight in the corner is pretty much completely stuck. You have a fantastic position here, completely winning. And because of that, queen to f3 is a very bad move, and the other bad move here is capturing the rook immediately. And this is actually worse because it gets checkmated. Queen to f4 check, and keep this mating combination in mind since it once again occurs in many Traxler scenarios. King moves back to e2. Now queen to f2 check, once again defended by the knight. King moves, knight back to c5 check. King moves, and queen to d4 checkmate. This pattern here you see with the pawn, the queen, and both of these knights, you will see a couple of times in the Traxler. So either capturing the rook or queen to f3 are both bad moves. Instead, pawn to g3 is much better here, at which point what you want to do is to capture on g3 with the knight. Once again, this little nice discovery here, seeing the bishop, they will capture back. And the very important thing to know here is to not capture immediately. That is actually a very bad move. Instead, you have to play an intermediate check, queen to d4. The king will move to f3. King to e2 here does not work because you take the bishop with check, and after they block, you simply take the knight here, and you're actually up material after all of these shenanigans. So because of that, instead, king to f3 here, but now you have a very nice castles. Remember what I mentioned earlier, now the rook is seeing the king for this very nice pin here, and normally this would be a devastating and terrible move because they would have this discovery, but they cannot move their knight anywhere, and so it does not apply, and white has to find the one and only move here, which is rook to h4. Very funny looking move, rotating the rook up and actually defending the bishop through the queen, and here you have to play pawn to e4 check. When I say you have to play, that literally means it is the only move that does not lose on the spot. And here they have two moves, either running the king back or capturing the pawn fiercely. If they do capture, then simply knight to e5 check here. They cannot have their king keep the defense of the rook any longer because of this check, so they have to capture. And here, very important detail, do not capture the rook, instead capture the bishop right here. And after, for example, king back to g2, you know, then take the knight on f7 because it was once again pinned. And after something like queen to e2 here, you are still down material. However, you are actually slightly better here because white has such prohibited and slow development. Their king is actually still kind of stuck. And because of that, the engine's best move here is actually a kind of crazy pawn up to b5. I guarantee you, give 1,000 people, they would almost never find that move. The idea is to get the bishop on this long diagonal as fast as possible and try to keep the attack rolling and take advantage of the fact that white is criminally underdeveloped. So if they capture on e4, that is what you want to do. If instead they run their king back to g2 here, this is the line that gives the engine, or the engine says it gives them a little bit of advantage. It's not really there. If they do this, then what you want to do is to capture the bishop. Now the knight is under attack once again. However, because it is no longer pinned anymore because the king is on g2, they will simply move it, knight to g5. And now you want to go knight to d4 here. Once again, that very typical move, moving the knight into the center, controlling very important squares. And after something like rook to h7, and now rook to f5 here, attacking the knight. If the knight moves, then you lose the rook. Engine says that white is slightly better, but let's be honest, if you had this position as white, would you really feel that advantage? Even though you're up 2 points of material, black still has a prolonged attack going against you that will last for pretty much the rest of the game. So that is king to e3, the other good line for white here. However, now let's get into the bad moves. So with this check, checking the king, only this move and this move worked. All other four lose on the spot. I'm going to show you exactly how. So first off, the most common of these is king to e1, which looks pretty natural, getting the king back to the starting square. However, this is completely losing because of queen to h4 check. Checking the king, if king over at f1, then queen to f2 is just checkmate. If king up to e2, then now you have queen to f2, check, and we actually have the exact same mating pattern that we saw a second ago in the other line. King to d3, knight to c5 check, king moves over, and now queen to d4. We have the exact same positioning of pieces. So because of that, that move does not work at all. Instead, what white has to do here, if they even want to try and survive, is pawn to g3, at which point you want to play capturing it with your knight. They will capture back because this discovery, you're attacking the rook, this discovery is simply going to be way too strong for white to handle. If they're at any point trying to survive here and not lose on the spot, they're going to capture. You capture their rook now. They have to block the bishop because of king up. Then knight to d4. The king has to move away from the defense of the queen, and because of that, you are simply going to win it. So bishop back to f1 here, and after a simple rook over to f8, you are going to win the knight. And at the end of the day, also by the way, the knight cannot move because then queen to f1 check would be checkmate because now the rook sees that as well. So when you capture the knight, you are only going to be up about 4 points of material, but white has such little and just useless development, like after queen to e2 and rook takes on f7, white has literally no development except a queen on e2, which you don't even develop your queen usually, so I mean, yeah, it's just completely lost. King to e1 is a very bad move. The next most common thing for them to try is king back to f1. Maybe it was a misclick of g1. If that is the case, that would just be kind of sad. And this line, you were not completely winning like the other one, but you will still get a much more favorable position. Queen to h4 once again, threatening this checkmate. And white's move here is queen to f3, which I must say is not the best move. However, this literally occurs in 85% of games, or somewhere around that region, just a ridiculously amount of games. So I want to show you what to do against this. If they do play this, then knight to d4. You attack the queen, you attack the pawn on c2 with a fork here, and after like queen to e3 for example, you actually want to capture on c2. And normally going for this fork would probably be a bad idea, but in this case it has the added benefit of having this check, which will often be checkmate, like for example queen to f3 here, very calm move, queen to e1, checkmate. And because of that, instead they have to play queen back to e2 here to keep this defended. And if they do this, then you simply want to play knight to g3 check. You are getting this very nice fork now. They're forced to capture because of that. Now you capture the rook in the corner, king moves up, and after a simple castles here, you just have a fantastic position. You are only up 1 point of material here. However, this pin is extremely hard to stop, and this rook in the corner, we do not have to capture it immediately, but it is just right there. They're going to be down an extra rook, and we simply have a completely winning position here. So because of that, queen over to e3 is not a very good move. Instead, pawn to g3 is probably the best try for them to counterattack our queen. But if they do this, then now you want to slide right in. Queen to h3 check, queen to g2 here, and you actually want to drop the queen back to f5. I don't actually know why I drew that arrow because the bishop was defended. Sorry, it's just a lot of moves right now. King moves over to g1. Now knight to f3 check. You're actually going to win white queen with a very nice little dance. King over. Now knight to h4 check. You're going to win the queen because of this discovery right here. I mean, yeah, what else do you really want? You are completely winning here. And if they play something else that is not those moves, you can really follow the exact same usual Traxler ideas. Then their next move that they can play that is once again losing is king over to e2. This one is not great because now knight to d4 check. Now this move, which is already very useful in almost every single Traxler situation, it comes with check, so we get an extra tempo, and after king up to e3, we now go queen to h4 check, and we basically get a supercharged version of the other variation with king up to e3 and queen to h4, because we already have the knight on d4, which is so extremely powerful. Just because of that one little detail, it is now -8 instead of the usual plus like 0.4 or so. If you do get this position, then white is going to play pawn to g3 most likely to attack your queen, prevent it from coming to f4. However, you want to sacrifice your knight. This knight takes on g3 sacrifice happens at least once in pretty much every single variation. They take back, and because the rook is defended in this case, and you cannot see the bishop, you actually want to take on g3 here, and the engine gives, what's that, mate in 13. And because there's not too much other meat to this king to e2 line, I'll show you that nice little checkmate, or maybe not that actual one since mine comes a little sooner than that, but let's see, there are about 40 games or so that this exact checkmate happened. King has to go to e4 here, and now pawn up to d5 check is the move. If they capture with their bishop, then now bishop to f5 is a beautiful checkmate. Knight defends the bishop, queen defends the pawn, and every single square is covered from the king that is somehow got way up to e4 here. So instead of that, king takes on d5. They're trying to survive for as long as they can. Now bishop to e6 check here. King has to move. King over to c5 is by far the most common move. However, king over to e4 back is slightly more resilient. But now I have pawn up to b6 check. King moves. Pawn to a5 check. King moves. Bishop to d7 check. They have to block. You capture. Checkmate. Knight defends the bishop, pawn here, The queen covers all these squares, and it's just a fantastic case of the Traxler. The king has been walked all the way over to the other side of the board with a beautiful checkmate. And because of that, king to e2 is once again a very bad line for them. And the last one, and the one that is most rare, is king up to f3 here. This one attacks the knight, and what you want to do here is a little bit different. It is queen to f6 check. If you play another typical Traxler move, you'll still be completely winning, but this is the absolute best line here. The idea is that after they capture the knight, they have to capture, otherwise they would get checkmated in 4. Now queen to f4 check. King has to go to d3 here. If king to d5, then queen to d4 is just checkmate, so not too much there. It's king to d3, and after king to d3, you want to go pawn to d5, which is once again a very typical resource in the Traxler to try and get the bishop to stop seeing this knight, as well as open up their bishop, and often do this with tempo. They have to capture back to keep the defense. Now queen to d4 check, king moves over. You actually want to capture the bishop, and after they capture a rook, and you capture on g2, even though white is up a massive 7 points of material, they are literally doing nothing. They're all on the back rank except for this knight, which is in no man's land, and this king has somehow got into e2 and is walked up, and then it's walked back, and then what you want to do here is after they move, you can continue to play checks. I mean, for example, after queen to h3 check, engine gives, what's that, mate in 11 now. Your knight, your queen, and your bishop, and potentially your rook as well, is simply going to be way too strong for white to handle. You are completely winning in this position. Alright, so we have gotten through every single move that white can make after we played this check. However, now let's go back a little bit and let's see if they actually do not capture the bishop in the first place, instead play king over to f1. I don't know why that bugged out, that was kind of weird. But anyways, if they do this and not capture the bishop, it might look like our attack is very uncoordinated. However, you will see it is actually surprisingly coordinated, and you can get a fantastic attack against white in pretty much every single line. So now your queen is actually under attack, and it has no way out, so you have to move it to e7 here. They will capture your rook in the corner, and now a very important pawn up to d5 here. Once again, you see this very nice idea. They cannot capture with the bishop in this scenario, because then bishop to g4, and their queen is actually just completely trapped here. Their queen, I mean, has no squares, and they can actually get a lot of material back after they capture the bishop. You capture the queen, and they capture with the rook. I don't know what that weird thing keeps happening is. And in this position, white is actually still up an entire piece, which is crazy after sacrificing their queen. But after a nice knight to g4 check, they really just do not have anything here. And if they play king back to g1, you're actually going to smothered checkmate them. I'll show this just as a little bonus. Queen to c5 check here. If king over to f1, then queen to f2 is checkmate. So king over to h1, knight to f2 check. King moves, knight to h3 double check. Once again, if king to f1, then queen to f2 is checkmate. So king over, queen to g1, beautiful sacrifice, rook takes, and knight to f2 is checkmate. White is up, what's that, 12 points of material, a queen and an extra piece as well, and yet they're checkmated in the corner, surrounded by their material. So capturing on d5 the bishop, loses their queen and loses to a very nice attack and possibly a very nice smothered checkmate. Oh, I went a little far here. Let me find my spot. Yeah, right, so here they cannot capture the bishop because of that. So instead, capturing with the pawn is the main line here, and you see the engine gives plus free, despite the fact that black wins like 60% of games in this position. You can see the engine is having just a heart attack here. Now it's +2. Where did the entire extra 1 point go? And you will see in the upcoming moves that the engine will actually get very, very confused. So after they capture the pawn and attack your knight, you want to hop it into the center. Knight to d4 here. Once again, it looks like our attack is very uncoordinated. It's fallen apart and already has. However, you will see that it is very, very coordinated, and white actually has to be extremely careful here. Even though they're up 6 points of material, they can lose extremely fast. So the most common move here by far, and I mean by far, is pawn to c3. most common move, attacking the knight. However, this is not good. This is actually very bad for white. They've lost all their advantage, and you can actually get a completely winning attack against them. Instead, pawn to d6 is the much less played but also much better move. If they play this, then you want to capture it with your queen. If you capture it with the pawn, then your queen will end up getting blocked out, and your attacking chances have reduced much more because of that. Instead, you capture the queen, knight to f7, getting their knight out of the corner as well as attacking your queen. You have to move it to c5 is the best square for it, and after pawn to d3 here, you want to play bishop to g4. Once again, very typical idea, attacking the queen, and with this move, pawn to d3, they have themselves the one escape square that they desperately need, queen up. And here, I would recommend to play bishop back to h4. This is the engine's best choice, and even though white is up 5 points in material, literally an entire rook, that rook does not matter at all, and white is only up on the engine about 1.2. Like, I mean, where did the extra 3.8 points of eval go? Now it's back to 1. I mean, because we just have so many pieces surrounding their king, they're so undeveloped, and white must be extremely careful here to not lose very fast. Not too much to say, keep attacking, you are pretty much out of the opening stage by now, and keep on going. So because of that, pawn to d6 is the better move for them. However, like I said, pawn to c3 is much more common. I mean, much more common. This is by far the most played move. However, it is bad. And see the engine eval here? Like a minute ago, it was giving like even. Now it's -2, but now it's -2.6. You can see the engine does not understand this position. Now it's -2.8. How did it go from even to -2.8? How did that happen? Well, actually, I'll show you exactly why. After pawn to c3, you have the surprising bishop to g4 check. The only move attacking their queen, and they only have one safe square, queen to a4 check. And after they do this, you do not want to block the bishop. Instead, just play knight back to d7 here. And even though I've been playing all the best moves, now it's the plus of 3.4, 3.5. It keeps going up and up and up, 3.7. And I mean, the engine, you can very clearly see, does not fully understand this position better than us humans can. But you know who really knows at the end of the day. Now they're going to capture your knight in the center. They can also capture your bishop. I'll look at that right afterwards. They capture your knight, and now what you want to do here after they capture is play queen to f6. You are targeting a discovery against white, and they actually cannot stop this discovery in any way. Their king literally has no moves. If they capture here, you do not want to capture back. Instead, you simply play queen up to f4 here, retaining this discovered attack here. Also, very nice detail I'd like to show you. Queen to f4 does not work. This move actually loses. You can see the eval bar just shot up because of bishop to d3. Crazy sacrifice, because after we capture, they capture on f2, and somehow we actually have nothing in this position because we've actually just lost too many pieces. We lost one of our extremely valuable bishops. So because of that, queen to f5 here instead. Or I meant f4. Did I say? I'm getting confused. This move on f5 is very bad. This move on f4 is very good. After you play this, white's best move here is bishop back to e2. Now you want to get this discovered check here, but you have to be a little careful. You have to play bishop to d4 check, because otherwise the queen will be able to capture. So instead, king to e1 here, you play check, queen to f2 check, king moves, you capture the bishop, king moves, bishop to f5 check, king to b3, queen to d3 check. I'm going to stop right here. We are on move 17, which is like pretty far past than most people would ever need to go. However, once again, you can see that white is up a massive amount of material, but the engine is giving -10 because their king is so unsafe, and they're simply going to completely lose here. I will give you one more thing. In this position, the best idea to continue is to play pawn to c6 to undo the pin and try and get your knight in. Have fun, keep attacking, have a great game here. So that is what to do if they play king back to f1, or actually, sorry, if in this position they capture the knight. However, they can also try to capture the bishop on f2 here. If they do this, then you have to play queen to h4 check, the only way to retain your -4 advantage. And once again, it's just ridiculous because white has nine entire points of material, an entire queen, yet the queen is over here and doing nothing. After they block with g3, queen goes back to f6 check. King has to run to e1 here, their only move to try and survive, and now you have a very nice queen to f5. This move looks a bit odd, but what you see here is that white has completely boxed in their king. They actually have no moves that they can make here, and we're going to play knight to c2 here, defended by the queen, and they're going to be forced to sacrifice. So the best move for them is rook over to f1 here, at which point you play knight to c2 check. They're forced to capture, you capture back, and I'm going to stop the analysis here because once again we are on move 15, which is just crazy. However, once again, you see material does not mean anything in the Traxler. White is up plus 3 points of material, an entire piece. However, that piece is stuck in the corner. White's king is just completely dead, and their extreme lack in development is causing them to pay the price. So that is the king to f1 line. All you need to know about them not capturing the bishop. And overall, that is actually all you need to know about the knight takes on f7 line. And I know that was a massive amount of analysis, but there are only two other variations that white can realistically play here instead of knight captures on f7, and those are bishop captures and also pawn to d4. I'll show both of those. And the first one I'll show here is pawn up to d4. What they're doing with this move is they are sacrificing a pawn. However, with that, they're opening up their queen, they're opening up their bishop, and because of that, we actually cannot capture on d4 and then do typical Traxler stuff. It will simply not work. And so because of that, you actually do not want to capture on d4 with any pawn, and instead capture on d4, or sorry, actually not capture on d4, instead play pawn up to d5. With this move, you are now opening up your own bishop and your own queen and attacking their bishop as well as their pawn, and we get a nice little pawn cube in the center. How adorable. And because of all this tension, white has a couple of moves that they can play here. If they capture on d5 their pawn, then what you want to do here is capture on d4 with your knight, and this is not a very good line for white because keep in mind that here we are not down a pawn after this trade, and c3 and knight to f5 here, your knight will actually rotate to d6, and you actually have a pretty good position here, so that's definitely not a bad option for you. If they capture your bishop, then you simply want to mirror them, capture their bishop, and yes, you're going into an endgame here. However, this endgame is by no means bad, and you can see the engine here gives 0 zeros pretty much. And not too much to say here. You'll probably go pawn to h6, kick the knight out, then try knight to c6 here is what the engine gives. Then move your bishop out, probably castle, probably long maybe to get on this open file. I can't really say too much about this. You have a decent chance in this endgame here, but the absolute best thing for them to do here is to capture on d5 with their bishop instead. If you face this, they are pretty well prepared. What you want to do here is you want to capture on d5 with your knight. You can also play knight captures on d4, and you can still play this in a Traxler kind of way. However, I honestly recommend to not get in all the craziness here. Since this is already such a rare line, you really do not want to have to make yourself memorize all this extra stuff. There's just no reason. You don't have to do that. Instead, I would recommend to simply play knight takes on d5 here. Then they're going to take your bishop most likely. If they capture your knight, this is once again not a good move because of knight takes on d4 now, c3, knight back to f5. We get a very similar position. This knight will very likely go to d6 in the future, and this is not great for white. Instead, capturing your bishop now is better because of this nice pin here, and where you want to move your knight is over to e7. A queen trade will ensue, and white is preferable here because they are up one pawn. However, that pawn here is this very weak c pawn. I mean, I can't imagine them keeping that pawn forever, you probably go pawn to f6 here to kick the knight out, then probably play bishop to g4, attack this knight, maybe try and double their pawn structure, moving this knight to e6 here to try and get this would probably be a good idea. Then try to long castle. I do not think you have that bad of a position in this endgame. So that is what to do against the d4 line. Very rare, however, if they do play this, you do want to know this pawn to d5 move. And the last thing that they can realistically play is bishop takes on f7. This is known as the probably best line against the Traxler. They simply win a pawn, then are going to move their bishop back out of the way and just try to consolidate their pieces. However, I'm going to show you exactly how to have lots of fun in this position. So, if they move either bishop back to e3 or bishop to c4, those lines are pretty much the same. However, bishop to d5 here, after we move our king up to e7, and bishop to d5, this is the best line for them objectively. And I know our position looks very ridiculous right now. Our king is on e7. What is going on? However, this is by no means bad, and white will actually have a lot of trouble surviving in this position, as crazy as it may look. And your plan here is actually very, very simple. This rook will go to f8 to control this f file here and also prevent the knight or the bishop from ever going there. This queen here will go to e8 and then out to either g6 or to h5 and cause shenanigans on the king side. And you'll see all these moves are pointed at the king side. You will play pawn to h6, kick the knight back to f3. You'll also play pawn to d6 and bishop to g4 to try and get a pin on white's knight here when it drops back. And the first move you want to start with when initiating this plan is rook over to f8. Just prevent any pieces from ever coming there. What you do not want to do here is capture on d5 the knight, since even though we do get the bishop, after captures back, knight to d4, pawn to c3, and knight to f5. White is up one pawn here, but our position positionally is actually horrible because our nice plan here of trying to attack white has completely disappeared. And because of that, the engine hates this. Practically, this is also terrible. Do not go into this. Do not trade your knight for the bishop. Instead, rook to f8 here. Then after white castles, you want to play pawn up to d6 here. Open up your bishop. You can see all the moves are starting to come into plan. And pawn to c3 here is the most common and probably best move according to the engine right now. However, this practically might not be the absolute best because of a nice bishop to g4 here. Attacking the queen, and now that they have this path over here, they're probably going to move their queen there. Queen to b3 is the most common move. However, the best move here, according to the engine, is actually knight back to f3, which is very anti-human because now their knight is simply pinned here. You can play knight to h5, put more pressure with the rook and the bishop, and they're going to have lots of trouble in that position. So because of that, instead queen to b3 here is much more commonly played, at which point what you want to do is play pawn up to h6. Attack the knight, and people here are not going to want to drop the knight back and let us trade and double their pawns. So instead, knight to e6 here is the most common, at which point you want to capture. They capture back. Knight to a5 here, attack the queen as well as defend the pawn. It will have to move to d1 is the best square. You are going to capture, and now pawn up to b4 here. I'll let you do your own analysis in this position. We are on move 13. We're up a piece here, however, we are actively getting forked, and the engine's best choice here is pawn up to d5, actually breaking open in the center, because even though our king is right here, we are much more developed than them, and much more ready to start attacking and getting the position wide open. So that is what to do against the bishop to d5 line, if they do end up playing that. But instead, either bishop to b3 here, which is what I personally recommend, or bishop to c4 is much more common. And if they do this, then what you want to do is simply play rook over to f8 first. Once again, control the square, and we have the exact same plan here. White will most likely castle. However, in my fried liver video, I actually recommended to not castle here, and I'll show what to do against the setup that I recommend in that video afterwards. But most common by far is to castle here, at which point you want to play pawn up to d6, open up your bishop, and after pawn to d3, now pawn to h6. Attack the knight, it has to drop back to f3, and now bishop to g4. Yes, the engine gives, what's that, plus 1.8. However, practically, this is exactly what you want, and we're going to have a fantastic time in this position. You are currently pinning white's knight to their queen, and they have to be pretty careful here. If they play like a random move like a3, then now knight to d4, and they're actually just getting completely crushed here because of after knight to d2, now knight to h5, and we simply have more attackers than they do defenders, or actually the same amount, but they're going to have to capture back the pawn and open their king real wide, which is just fantastic for us. Instead, what they should play here is bishop to e3 to not allow any of that, and what you want to do here is likely to not trade bishops, because then the rook would open up to see the knight and a lot of our pressure would go away. Instead, what's better is to continue with the plan, move your queen over, move your knight to h5, add more pressure to this, and likely rotate your knight to f4 here. I do not think you have bad chances in this position. I think you have very good chances, and that is what to do against the most basic setup. The other thing they can do is what I recommend to do, which is pawn to d3 for white immediately, not actually castles. What I recommend to do in my Fred Leader video, to not castle immediately, and after pawn to d6 by us, instead white goes pawn to h3 immediately, not letting the bishop go to this square. And if they do this, then now you do not have that bishop to g4 idea. So what you want to do here is accelerate this queen here and queen here idea and try to get some tricks on white's king side if they do end up castling there. So here I'd recommend queen to e8, at which point the best move for them is knight to f3. This is what I recommend to get the knight onto h4 here, which is the golden square. You do not want to play queen to g6 here, which is very common but not a good move, because after knight to h4, attacking and defending this, we actually just do not have that many good chances in this position. We likely have to drop back, and after knight to c3, this is just not very good for us. Instead, you want to play knight to d4 here, attack this knight, and because of that, they're going to have to deal with it, likely knight to d2 to defend. And now you go about your merry way, keep going on the attacking plan. Likely queen to g6 is the best move according to the engine right now. Keep attacking, keep trying to get at white, and once again, I do not think you have bad chances in this position at all. And in this line, white does not have the best luxury of going knight to h4 here, because then queen up to g5 was a move that was not possible before, but is now, because the bishop no longer sees the queen. White would have to go pawn to g3 here. Now white's king side is very weak, their knight is very misplaced from their bishop. This knight is kind of off to the side, not doing much. I do not think you have bad chances in this position. Alright, so that was the complete guide to the Traxler counterattack. I'm not sure exactly how long this video is, but I'm guessing it is quite long, probably one of my longer ones. I hope you have a fantastic day. If you would like to, like and subscribe for more videos. Comment below if you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time. Have an absolutely fantastic day.